The Hunter. Emily had been working at the university as a paleontology professor for almost 5 years now and loved her job. The students, the work, everything was always perfect, that is, until her father died. She'd wanted to follow in his footsteps as a great and world-renowned paleontologist, but somewhere along the way she became comforted by her steady income and structured life in the small city. As the sole remaining family member, Emily went solemnly to hear the reading of her late father's will, and that is when she learned about the hunt. The lawyers explained that her father had requested she pick up where he left off in the search for the ever-elusive Bigfoot. She must fulfill his will, or she would not be able to inherit the rest of his possessions. "I cannot go to the mountains for however long this is supposed to take. I have a job," Emily shouted. The lawyer tried to help Emily understand, but she stormed out of the door confused and angry that she was being asked to uproot her life at the whim of her dead father. After a few days, Emily agreed to the insane terms the lawyer had proposed, but didn't believe she would really have to set out on such an adventure. She just wanted to clean out his study and move on with life. While she sorted through dusty old ethnographies, ancient relics, and books as old as time, she came across an unlabeled, leather-bound notebook she didn't recognize. She thumbed through the pages and they glinted with a golden sheen. This book was her father's journal for every hunt he set out on in search of the Bigfoot. Even though she grew up in this room and her very own research was cataloged here, she had never laid eyes upon this book, but today it just happened into her hands. It detailed his course to get to the remote location he'd been visiting for decades without anyone ever knowing. She stashed the book in her bag, ran out the door, and jumped in her car. "Okay, Dad, I'll do it. Just tell me where to go," Emily spoke out loud to the book in her hands, then drove off. She packed some gear she had stashed away from her days doing field work and called her boss. She was ready to embark on this journey no matter how long it took and with a new sense of purpose. She drove for hours and hours into the mountains and up along ridges, following switchbacks and small dirt roads. At some point the signs had completely stopped and there was only dense, damp woods. The sounds of nature filled the air and there hadn't been another vehicle for at least 2 hours. Emily suddenly realized she was alone with only an old book to get her through whatever she may come across. Some scattered notes scribbled here and there in the notebook mentioned crossed and broken trees as a sign of the creature's presence. Once she saw the first few shattered trees, she pulled off the damp road and made through the forest, eager to find a clearing to make camp. There was no such clearing, and she hadn't brought enough tools to make one. Emily heard a strange noise. Then turning to investigate, she caught her pack on a felled tree and ripped it wide open, spilling her supplies. Some items rolled away from her as she stretched to gather what she could. Her tent, she noticed now, had a hole in it as well. Perfect, Emily scowled. Feeling dejected, she gave up looking for a spot and just went to work setting up her torn tent. Finally, having at least some bit of shelter, Emily went to find wood for a fire, but most of the wood scattered nearby was too moist to burn. A little further away, she found a larger tree that was down and tried to cut some chunks for kindling when her pocket knife slipped and cut open her palm. At this point, Emily was dejected and questioned why she was even doing this. She wrapped her hand in a piece of her shirt she tore away and headed for the humid tent. By this time, she was defeated. She sat weeping in her tent as rain started to drizzle slowly inside, bleeding still from her wound. Suddenly, a rustling in the woods startled Emily, and she held her breath. Footsteps crept closer and closer to the tent. She was too scared to look out there. She collected every bit of courage left in her and busted through the tear in the tent, wielding her metal canteen. It was the only solid thing she had besides her pocket knife. Just as Emily sprung from the tattered tent, she saw a handsome young man hiking toward her. They were both quite taken aback and embarrassed at themselves. "My name's Mason," the stranger said, hauling a loaded pack. He helped her bandage up her hand and pitched his tent. "What are you doing out here all alone? You gotta be 20 miles into the wilderness." Mason was impressed. Emily trailed off. "Never mind." "What?" asked Mason. "Okay, you have to promise not to laugh. I'm hunting a Bigfoot for my late dad. He was kind of a kook, but a brilliant man, and, well, this is what he wanted me to do." Mason's eyes widened. "I know all about Bigfoot. I come here for the same reason and have been for 12 years, he explained. "Well, you can have at it. I'm done," Emily reacted. "No, you can't quit. No one ever makes it up this far here. You have to keep going. Mason urged Emily on all night with tales of his sightings in the wild. By morning, Emily agreed to continue on with Mason. Together they could do it. The next morning they set out into the trees. It was nice. Emily quickly grabbed her things from the tent and crept away under the veil of night. She knew that she needed to go alone in this to understand what her father had known for years. It was as if she could see the woods breathing and all the life around her made sense. She intuitively walked through the woods following a seemingly illuminated path. In this realm, she was able to see every leaf, every branch, the small critters in the shape of the ridge ahead. The farther into the thickness she went, the more it felt natural to her. Emily was silent and stealthy, allowing herself to hear everything around her. There came a rustling a few feet away and to her right. As she turned to see what was stalking her, she already knew the answer. The Bigfoot was with her. It probably had been for a while now. They mimicked each other's motions and strolled through the trees quietly together until they came to rest. The world around them blanketed them in comfort. Emily had become so attached to the environment that she was part of it, and this allowed her to find the creature. She didn't know what she was going to do if she found Bigfoot. She can't kill the beast. She can't expose it to other people. It would be devastating for the environment. They would ravage every bit of land to find this gentle giant. Through the night, the two mocked each other's movements around the area, keeping a small distance between them. She watched everything the creature did and understood its motivation. Every intention she once had has now changed. She could stay there and protect this land and creature. After all, she was human and could keep others away. As these thoughts were running through her head, the dawn began to barely break. Emily snacked on some granola and offered a handful to the creature. She dropped it on a leaf and pushed it toward it. As the sun began filling the sky, they sat quietly, munching on dried fruits and grains. This was truly the most magical and surreal experience of her life. All thanks to her father. She was in a completely new world. Could never go back to normal. Even though her adrenaline was high, Emily's eyes began to droop with sleep. The sun couldn't help her stay awake any longer. She drifted off with the shelter of woods comforting her. Emily groggily opened her eyes. Mason was shaking her shoulders, shouting, "Emily, are you okay? Why did you leave?" "I'm fine," she yawned. "I saw it. It was here." "Come on, let's get you out of here." Mason grabbed her hand and led her out of the